Hi, y'all. I'm Lisa Keeker, the founder and CEO of Studio Grow, and welcome back to another episode of the Business of Boutique Fitness. I'm joined by the amazing Matt Hanton.
Always a pleasure.
I mean, it's so much fun.
So excited
It's
to
so
talk
much fun.
today.
You got to go for a stroll around Charlottesville this afternoon.
I've got to tell you, absolutely beautiful.
I know, it's kind of
Absolutely
charming.
beautiful. Yeah, I was saying earlier, this is where they keep America. It's like something out of a movie.
This is not Los Angeles.
It's not LA, which is where I'm living right now. I love LA for sure. LA has its vibe, but this feels like something out of an all-American movie. Beautiful.
I just think it's sweet. It's a sweet place. It's a sweet place. Well, we're talking about sweet at this moment. We're getting ready to talk about uncomfortable. So today's episode, and actually the next series of episodes, is all about uncomfortable conversations you're going to have as a studio owner. I have to tell you, I've had plenty of conversations that I never expected to have as a studio owner. You know, everything from clients who, bless their hearts, were dealing with olfactory issues and we were dealing with smells that we couldn't handle in this one, to team issues, to just the business conversations that you're gonna have to have in one way, shape, or form if you wanna have a successful business. So in part one, we're gonna be talking all about business conversations, the big conversations that really make a difference in your business. Now, over the years, when you think business conversations, what in your mind have been the hardest ones to have?
Oh, I mean, there's so many, and I think it's going to be slightly different for everyone as well in terms of what sort of spikes your anxiety. But I guess my first point is if it's spiking your anxiety, you've got to pay attention to it, right? And probably the more anxiety you have around it, the more important it is that you have it, right? But from the business perspective, I mean, I'm thinking things around price increases are the first that come to mind, right? As soon as it's time to increase those prices, you start to lose a little bit of sleep, maybe. So that's probably the first and biggest one that comes to my mind. But then there's also ones around, rent and leasing and all this kind of stuff. So, yep, there's a full spectrum, and I'm excited to talk them all through today so that we can get some sleep back on our listeners' books.
I like that. When it comes to mind on this, I see two big things that pop up on these. The first is people tend to have anxiety around negotiations. I grew up in South Louisiana where haggling, better known as negotiations elsewhere, is like culturally appropriate. And so we grew up negotiating about everything. If my mother sent me to the market, she expected me to negotiate the eggplants to a price that was reasonable. She expected all of these things. I think my mother sent me on my own to negotiate a car when I was like 18. And she was like, this is a great learning experience. And it was, incredible. But I find people hear the term negotiations and it's as if they've put up like this horrific roadblock. Like if you need to negotiate, if you don't have a legal degree or have not gone to the debate school or something like this, you have a problem. Second biggest thing that tends to cause anxiety is money. Like we know this innately. If you look at massive stressful conversations, someone had read me a study or portion of a study about a year ago talking about in a marriage, like what are the single most stressful conversations you will have? And it was like 95% of people said it was about money. We know money is a stressful topic on this one. So when we start dealing with money, whether we're talking about prices, whether we're talking about asking for reductions on things, I think we can naturally expect our anxiety to go up on that one. And to be aware that that's normal. Like, I think going into this, that's probably one of the most important things on this. So let's talk about the first, and I think probably the single most uncomfortable conversation.
Big call.
Really close to the single most uncomfortable conversation, which is price increases. This is something that is a natural part of business. I do not know of any company that was in business 10 years ago that still would consume it was natural or normal to have the same prices that it has now. In fact, I don't know of many companies that were in business 2 years ago, especially with all that's come over in terms of inflation and so many different changes, that think it's normal to have a difference, no difference in price. Even just looking at Amazon, we're confronted with, we're filming this in May of 2025. We know that tariffs and a lot of other things are changing the landscape dramatically. And everyone, not just us, is suddenly very concerned with price increases.
Yep. And it's a fact of life. Why do we pretend like when it comes to our studios and our businesses that we're somehow immune from that being a fact of life that everyone goes through, right? I think we're not a dispendable resource, right? I always like to reference the fact that when you ask people what the most important things in life to them are, they will always say family and health, right? And we are providing services that directly talk to one of the top two things that are most important to people in their entire life. So when you combine the fact that price increases are natural, we all know, we all expect them, right? And the fact that we're such an integral part of what people look for in life, why do we work ourselves up so much?
I mean, I think, let's be honest with you, the biggest fear is that you're going to announce price increases and every single person is going to quit. By the way, have not actually ever seen this happen. I need to preface this as we're going in. How you do price increases is as important as recognizing the need to do price increases. And I want to make sure we're thinking about both things. I was chatting with a friend, and he sent me a phenomenal older Harvard Business Review article from about 2 years ago. And he said, when you hit inflation, you deal with something called the inflation trilemma. I did not know this was an actual business school thing. It was that you would need to cut prices, cut margins, or cut corners. We're in a time where we've definitely been dealing with inflation. If you're in Western Europe, you've been dealing with significant inflation, especially in regards to utilities, probably since the start of the Russian-Ukrainian war. You have been dealing in the United States with a roller coaster of inflation, and certainly we've seen that reverberate in the last few months all over the world. We're sorry to the rest of the world for that, by the way. But with that in mind, as studio owners, I don't think any of us want to cut our margins. I think we're recognizing that going and changing our margins aren't an option anymore. I know none of us want to cut corners. Yeah. So this leaves us with really, a predominant choice of recognizing, do I just cut prices? Now, interestingly enough, the argument in the article that I read said, hey, cutting prices is probably pretty important, but there's ways to do this that are more thoughtful on this one. In fact, they recommended 3 things. They recommend recalibrating the product stack. So recognizing, has consumer behavior changed? A lot of changes in consumer behavior since the pandemic, more changes in consumer behavior than since World War II. On this one. So is your product stack still serving your audience? Second, restructuring the brand, reconfiguring the brand, like a willingness to change and shift the brand as it is. A great example of this is a client of ours that had a massive yoga studio and a bar studio and recognized bar had changed rather dramatically. The demand wasn't sitting there. He had an empty classroom, and he and his wife, brilliant studio owners, made the decision to move to Reformer Pilates. They're now up to 3 or 4 Reformer Pilates classrooms. I mean, they're killing it. So a willingness to look at the core tenets of the brand and say, does this change? And finally, maybe rather than just cutting prices, replacing your current pricing model and treating it as a replacement rather than I am going to, drop my prices or do one of these types of things to go forward. I think this is a really important change and shift that we've got to make on this. So as you're looking at this, got to ask, what do you hear from people in regards to inflation these days?
Yeah, that it's just hitting people so hard in the hip pocket that they just can't justify the spend anymore, right? Which is why I go back to what we were talking about. It's so important to people, and this investment can save people money, will save people money, right? Because when you're investing in your health, the return on that investment, would you rather pay a gym membership or a hospital bill? Really, that's what it comes down to. So it's an investment that people can't really afford to not spend. So I think it's all just about reframing it in our minds, right? We just need to reframe the whole thing. And to your point around restructuring the brand as well, we do this in our personal lives all the time.
All the time.
Right? We get a haircut. We color our hair. We buy a new wardrobe. We rebrand ourselves all the time. We can do it with our businesses too.
I love that. I love that. I love that. So guys, rather than cutting our prices, cutting our margins, or cutting corners. Now it's our chance to really consistently go forward. Again, recalibrate the product stack, restructure the brand, replace your existing product stack and pricing model in this one. So if you're going to replace your pricing model, I think one of the most critical things to start with, really simple in this, is to know your numbers. 100%. I mean, it is very rare that we are dropping prices. I got to be honest with you. If inflation is going up and you're cutting prices, you are cutting margins. There's no questions asked. So when we're talking about replacing your pricing model, we are talking about going up in prices. I think critical thing to be doing this. The question is, how much do you actually need to go up? Yeah. I mean, I think that's a critical thing. I mean, like, push it. Yeah. And you and I have had a lot of talks about being data driven. I think we know at this point the best way to know this is to know the numbers. So when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at things like what's your current utilization rate? Yep. Something people don't oftentimes talk about. Mm-hmm. I mean, how many people are showing up to class? How many of your private sessions are full? What's an average ratio of capacity in your small group training programs? That's going to lead you really quickly based on your current prices to how much you're earning per session.
Yeah, your frequency. So as someone's a member with you, how often on average does one of your clients take class? Yeah. What is that stat?
By the way, dramatically different, interestingly enough, in certain modalities in the US versus if we go to Western Europe versus if we go to Asia. So like take Legree style Pilates, so Megaformer style of Pilates. Here in the US, I mean, it's 4 times a week on average. There's a reason why if you go and look at Solid Quartz membership, you realize it's based on 16 times a week. That's how people are using it here. If I look at the same modality and I go to Portugal or I go to France, they're going 8 times a month. They're going twice a week. I can see where this goes. If I flip on over to Melbourne and Sydney, well, are they mimicking more the US?
Yeah, they're more the US style. Yeah, we're very closely aligned in everything that we do. So yeah, 100%. I think it's such a great point. You've got to know your local community,
absolutely,
your demographic, your people, your modality.
And in addition to knowing how people are utilizing this, I think you got to know your expenses. Yep. It's the most important part of this.
Yeah, it's a huge line item.
And it's something that we don't look at very often. I mean, when people set their pricing, in my mind, they set their pricing based on what a competitor charged, what somebody told them they should charge. And by the way, people are going to tell you should be as cheap as possible. Every person is going to tell you that. We literally did a survey, and I've told the story many times. If you've heard it before, forgive me, but it is worth repeating. We had a client who had studios, then he had HVLPs, so a very low-cost style of gym. And he said, do you mind running the survey that you're doing for studios? Will you do a quick one and just run them on the gym side for me? This man was a $10 a month gym. I'm going to be very clear on this. And 90% of people who wrote in told us it was too expensive. Okay. Is that kind of crazy?
That blows my mind.
I know. I mean, I was like, where do we go from here? I mean, like, are we into like single digit numbers? Because that's feeling like it's not going to work on this one. So, understand you are always going to be expensive according to people. And finally, third thing that how we set our pricing is, what do you think you're actually worth? Mm-hmm. Like, you are going to have a number in your head that is going to be like, my worth is X. And I think you need to be very careful that you don't imprint that on your pricing, because it's probably causing a significant chunk of anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I always say when I'm helping people price their studios or readjust where they're at, that it's important to be aware of what other people are doing and, the feedback that you're getting, but you also have to run your own race, right? And you have to have confidence and full belief in your stack and where you're priced at. The value perception has to be there starting with you, or else people are going to pick up on it. If you're trying to sell something that you don't believe in, it's just not.
It doesn't work.
It's not going to be authentic.
It doesn't work.
They're not going to buy from you.
I mean, that is the creepy used car salesman.
Yes.
It is
100%.
100%.
That's what it is.
So looking at this, if we start with our numbers, it's going to be really clear, really quick. What's your break even? Like, what's your break even per person? And I want you to ask yourself very strongly, if you're going to go below that break even, you have 2 options. The first is that you can dramatically increase the number of people who are coming per session. Okay, so for example, if I'm averaging, let's say in a large group class, I could be averaging 20 and I'm averaging 12. If I get 16, 18, 20 people in that class on average, suddenly I'm going to be able to have the cost be a little bit less per person. I can charge less if I increase the numbers of people who actually show up. Second thing that I've got to think about is just looking around and saying, wait a second, like, can I add any ancillary services? Can I do any of these other things that are going to boost my numbers on top of this? How do I provide a better service to get people on around to this? So once I know those numbers, I'm going to be really digging in and saying, am I willing to take a loss every month? Am I willing to pay for X, Y, and Z person to come to my studio and take this class, take this private session, take X, Y, and Z? If the answer is no, and I hope it's no, because that's a very healthy answer to this, then you're going to need to have a very different perspective on whether or not you're going to change your prices or not. Now, let's talk a little bit about the theory of changing prices, because I think one source of anxiety, one source of discomfort is that people are talking to existing clients, some of whom have been extraordinarily loyal, some of whom may have signed up at a time when you said, I will never go up on prices. Please never say, I will never go up on prices. That is not realistic. So if that's the case and you're dealing with this, what's some of our options to ensure that, hey, we can make this a little bit easier to start to make baby steps towards these changes?
Yeah, I think it's similar to any change management process that you take someone through, right? The first step of that, it starts with you. You need to be really clear around what you're doing, your objective, your reasoning, how you came to the conclusions that you've come to, right? So that you can know the way forward in a really clear way, right? So when we talk about knowing your numbers, I think there's two really important pieces to it. There's reflection on the current state of play, where everything is currently at, but then also an element of forecasting out. So if I have this idea and go, okay, I'm thinking a 5% increase across the board, what does that look like? Does that solve my problems? Does that get me to where I want to be? Is it palatable? So it's a reflection, but it's also a forecast, right? So once you have that in mind, then you take people through that change management process. And I think we're all clients of somewhere, right? We all buy into some sort of subscription or whatever it may be. So what would we want, right? We want transparency. We want authenticity. We want a heads up, right? And we really just want to feel like we're valued and that we're not just being taken advantage of.
100%. So when I look at this, one of my first things is I break down and I think, how am I going to treat this differently for someone who is a long-term client and someone who's a brand new client? You know, I think that there's a case to be made that there are times that you have to raise prices across the board, including with existing clientele. And those numbers are going to make this very compelling. We actually put them into projection sheets now for clients so that we look out and we're like, if you don't, this is where you're going to be. That is a very simple way to help you make a decision and to hold true and be confident in that decision. We just made this with a client who has 3 studios. He is wildly successful, but really had seen his profits, drop significantly because of some major inflation changes in his country. And it's one of these things that he had never been willing to even talk about pricing until we dropped it into a projections document, and he said, "I can't not." And it is amazing how firm he's been and how well it's gone because he really believes in it and he's able to convey this. So, I can say that it's okay if you look at this and say, I'm not going to worry about member raises for 3 months, but I'm going to start new members changes immediately. That's a very, very clean option you have. You have an option to not raise your existing members all the way up to the new member pricing, but to raise them in between. You have the opportunity to raise everyone to the same thing. You can do this your way. I think there's a fear is this, that you have to do something. And it's almost as if studio owners forget this is your business. Looking into this, I got to ask, when you have somebody and they're like, I'm ready to make the change, what's the first steps you do?
Love the mindset that you're in. Yeah. We're absolutely going to make that change. Let's figure out how we're going to do it effectively, though, right? So the first thing that I want to be doing is I want to be making sure that I'm communicating across the board, right? So like you said, I've decided my segments, I've decided who's getting what, I've decided how it's all going. Communicate, right? And communicate authentically, transparently, clearly. Give some time, right? So don't say this is happening for you from tomorrow, right? Give a little notice period so that people can ask their questions and, you can have those conversations, but communication is key.
One of my things that I've learned is I've always told people that mass communication causes mass chaos. I learned this the hard way, by the way. I will say that if you just randomly raise your prices 20% and send out a quick email, that's not enough. If you've got a really existing client base, especially if you're a higher price service, and I'm going to say that's anything over $200 a month in this day and age. If you're anything over $200 a month, I recommend this is a personal outreach. Thoughtful, simple, hey, just want to check in. And even considering an opportunity for them to change or shift. We talk on this and replacing your current product stack as an alternative. I would argue it's sometimes replacing your client's current membership choice. And so, one thing that we would do as we're going across this is just figuring out, how have you actually been using my studio? Have you been coming in, twice a week instead of the unlimited membership that you've been on? Well, can I put you onto the right membership you should have been on for the last 6 months? We have an ability to assess where our clients are individually, have an individual conversation and move ahead with it. I think there's something really, really, really important. I also think, you touched on transparency and honesty. I feel like a lot of people understand that the economy is on a little bit of a wild ride right now. And being willing to say, I'm impacted. Like inflation has impacted me. My utilities are up 30%. My new equipment that I ordered is going to be stopped at the border, and we're going to have tariffs that are going to raise it 145%. People, generally speaking, understand those things, and they're going to understand why you've done this. This is also, by the way, total pro tip on this one. If you have been considering moving from credit card to ACH payments, so deductions from a checking account, this is a great way that you can give people a win where you're like, hey, we're going to have an optional discount for those who do ACH payments. It's something like this. By the way, I want to be very clear, in most parts of the world, you cannot charge extra for credit card fees. That is something, there's a limited number of states in the US and a limited number of countries outside of the US that allow that. In most places, you going and saying, if you use a credit card, you need to pay a 3.5% fee is in fact illegal. Okay, very important to note on this one. You offering a discount for an ACH is completely legal. So this is a way that if you want to say, hey, I'm going to do a 2% discount, or I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, you can also meet people where they're at and have ways to make this a little bit more palatable if you're making those changes, while also, by the way, really being great for your business for the long term.
Absolutely. Anytime you can really connect with your clients in an honest, transparent way where they feel seen and heard, absolutely. And I mean, it could just come down to, you could just put a picture of a carton of eggs in your email. That's not real advice. But it
kind of is.
Yeah, headline your email with it.
I think that's real, right?
Yeah, everyone knows.
Look, transparency in pricing. We love transparent pricing graphics. I think you've seen brands like Warby Parker, Everlane use this really wisely, really thoughtfully, where they're like, this is the actual cost of yarn. This is the actual cost of shipment. This is the actual cost of having a weaver make your sweater. You get to do the same thing in your studios. You can tell people this is what marketing really costs. This is what it really costs for my software. This is what my entire team, by the way, you are part of your team. Every single member, not just your teacher, is part of your team. This is what rent and utilities really cost for us. This is what our real profit margins are. This is fair. This is why we cost what we do. I give an example. You were at one of my favorite smoothie places very recently, about 45 minutes ago. And they do a brilliant pricing graphic because they're like, we know we're expensive. We're in a relatively, smaller town. We have, $10+ smoothies, but here's why. We use, organic fruits and vegetables. We work with team members that are salaried and that are paid, paid beyond living wages. There's a reason before this. And it's really hard, by the way, to have somebody look at you and say, I don't want my favorite teacher to be able to be paid a living wage. It's not going to happen.
Absolutely. And a lot of our clients are not business owners, right? So we have this lens on a lot of these things, but a lot of the people coming through our studios, they just don't think in that way, right? So if we can just put it out for that, the agreement is there. People do agree.
Yeah. Yeah. I think easy, simple, graphic, whether we're talking about eggs
Yeah.
or whether we're talking about a transparent pricing graphic, I think this is key on the end of this. Second most uncomfortable conversation from a business perspective is with your landlord.
Not the L word.
Not the L word. It's funny. So this is one that was never uncomfortable for me, but my parents were both landlords.
Oh, okay.
And so actually my
Interesting.
grandparents were both sets of grandparents were landlords too. So I grew up on the flip side of this. I grew up with them, and I knew what they wanted. Like they wanted great tenants. They wanted people who were going to be with them for the long term. I knew how long it would take someone to be replaced on where this is. So when it came to these, like I thought that was a very normal discussion to have. By the way, most people do not think this is a normal discussion to have. So let's talk for a hot second on rent negotiations, because you can renegotiate your rent at any point. You can renegotiate your rent or negotiate your rent for the first time before you sign a lease. You can renegotiate your rent if you are in the lease. You can renegotiate your rent if you're coming up for a renewal in your lease. So if there's a point in time when you recognize there is a need to change your rent, the numbers indicate that this is a problem on this is something that you need to feel comfortable and confident going to. I think this also indicates that you need to choose your landlord wisely.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, because a lot of the time we enter into these leases when we start our businesses and we don't have a lot of the business acumen and the sense that we now have, right? So we've maybe signed on the dotted line for something which was not necessarily fully in our best interests. It's important to remember that that's not a nail in your coffin. You can renegotiate all of these things.
You got to renegotiate smart though. And I think that's the key thing. So let's look at a couple of important numbers, I think, to know. So commercial vacancy, it's up all over the world, and literally all over the world. It's expected to peak in 2026 here in the United States at 24%. That is the highest in recorded history, thanks to just the continuation of work from home popularity. People are not going back to the office. Therefore, we recognize the commercial space, there is an enormous amount of vacancy in this. Harvard study showed that an average space is currently open 6 to 24 months on average. So understand commercial is very different than residential. It's something I think my mother hammered this into my head when we were looking at different properties. If she had a commercial space that was open, she expected it to be empty for 6 months at minimum. If she had an apartment or a house that was a rental home that was open, she wanted it to be open for a day. Yeah. It's a very different thing on this. So I think this yields itself if you recognize, hey, we've got high vacancy rates in many markets. We know that if somebody leaves, there's going to be a longer term period of vacancy for this. It kind of opens the doors for negotiation to be very natural.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, like you mentioned, the approach and how you do this is everything, right? The relationship with your landlord is really important. If you're in the position where you're currently looking for a location, you're really well primed to, choose a landlord and get the right deal in place, because that can be critical to the success of your business. But if you've already got one, you can work on that relationship, right?
I mean, I had a virtual coffee date with each of my landlords at least once a quarter. But with my one landlord that was critical to my growth success, it was every other week. Yeah. So I was able to, because I chose a landlord wisely, when I wanted to expand rapidly, because he believed hardcore in what I was doing, I went and I said, these are the markets I want to be in. You don't even have buildings in these markets, but I think you should. Mm-hmm. And he built buildings for me. Wow. Powerful, great example of how important that relationship is. So simplest thing is to say, hey, whether we're talking about a property manager, ideally a decision maker, so ideally the landlord itself, but if it's a major company or conglomerate that owns this, the closest thing do you have to a decision maker? Start putting yourselves on their calendar and start building the relationship. It opens up the foundation for you to have any of these conversations and make them natural, not uncomfortable.
Yep, absolutely. Business is relationships, right?
Now, I think oftentimes we assume the answer on this is going to be no, especially if you're in a lease. The number of people that have told me, I can't do this?
Yep.
Why would somebody say yes to this? Well, somebody's going to say yes for a number of things. They're going to say yes first because they want to keep you there. They're looking for a great tenant. I just want you to picture this situation. Like, you have an amazing building and you have the tenant from hell. They call you 6 times a week. You hear from your other tenants that they are loud, they are crazed. The sewage lines are backed up because they decided to flush things that never should have been flushed before in this. They are disrespectful. That they are, barely paying their rent. Nobody wants that. Like, that is a landlord's idea of hell. All you want to be is a good tenant. That is the first negotiation power on this one. It's to be the kind of tenant that you're like, hey, every landlord is singing your praises on this. And that's going to take you right there on this.
Yeah, I think it's
yeah.
such a valuable life lesson to just don't assume a no, right? Not just in business, but in everything in life. We've all heard it. You never know unless you ask,
I
right?
loved it. We jotted down the quote from Oprah that was, you get in life what you have the courage to ask for.
Absolutely.
It's so true. It's so true on this. Now, if you're going to come though and have an ask, here's how I recommend that you do it. The first is that it's got to be data driven. Your landlord is making decisions based on data. They're looking at things like, what are vacancies around them? What are similar buildings price points going for? What length of leases are their banks requesting that they sign? What are they really expecting as a norm in their area? So you're going to have to present a compelling case. Normally in a compelling case, I'm looking to start first with my own projections.
Yep.
Like, this is something where you can say, I am a great tenant. I am somebody you want to keep, but this is what my business can afford. This is a benchmark in our industry, which we oftentimes have next to your projections that says, hey, this is typical percentages of rent. This is typical rent cost per square foot or cost per square meter that we're looking at, the overall area. These are things that are going to be really good starting points, because if a landlord looks at this and says, okay, this is viable, this is a real deal, this is really what you need, they're going to be much more willing, I think, to say, hey, let's open the conversation.
Yeah, and contextualizing it can really help them understand, because they work in commercial property management and investment, and we're in fitness, for example. So painting that picture for them can really be helpful.
They're going to have industry benchmarks in real estate. You're going to need to give them industry benchmarks in fitness. You're going to need to explain what an ideal profitability percentage is. That we're looking at 30% of where we need to be in order to scale, in order to grow, in order to be sustainable in terms of a long-term business. You're going to want to show them, things like, what you're typically seeing for other major brands, things like that. Those are going to be the kind of data points that allow them to know your industry, not just their industry. Also important just to look around and say, what are other people charging? Like, can I find this at a better price point? Is this something that's an opportunity? By the way, I look across the board at this. I look at, what type of leases are other competitors, or other competing landlords asking for. What is the cost per square foot or cost per square meter? What are tenant improvement money or things that they're making and putting on offer there? It's really important that your landlord knows you are informed on the local real estate market and that you know if there's wiggle room on where this is. Also think really important for you to say, if you're making an ask of a landlord, you talk about what you're willing to give. I think the single most important thing to understand in any negotiations is that both parties need to feel like they won at the end of this. And so if you go in and your attitude is, which would be how I would start any conversation on this, is that I want you to have a successful business as a landlord. I want myself to have a successful business as a studio owner. What I am looking for is for us both to come out in the right at the end of this. That's the attitude you carry into this conversation that's going to get you what you want. So I'm going to come in with things like, hey, I want you to know I'm raising my prices. hey, I want you to know I'm changing my product stack because we've looked at all of these data points and I realize this is going to really significantly help my overall revenue, and it's going to make me long-term, likely to be your tenant for many, many, many years to come. I'm changing compensation. I'm doing these types of things. They're going to see that you are making active steps. It's going to make your landlord a lot more willing to make active steps as well.
Yeah, and just because they own the deed to the property does not mean that you have no leverage here and that you're not in a position of power, right? Because ultimately they want a long-term tenant that they can count on, and that can be you.
That's massive, massive, massive. These are conversations, when I run through them, I realize uncomfortable, yes, also necessary. 100%. I've had this conversation a few times, but I've told people, what I oftentimes see when somebody comes to me, and we get a lot of people that come to us and it's like they know it's too late. They're like, I would love for you to help me, but I'm at the tail end. Like bankruptcy is looming around the corner, things like that. And it's heartbreaking conversations from my mind on this. And years ago, I explained to somebody who was, I thought, probably about a year out from that. I said, you've got 3 uncomfortable conversations you're going to get to choose from. You can choose to have an uncomfortable conversation with your clients about your prices. You can choose to have an uncomfortable conversations with your landlord about your rent. You can maybe even choose to have an uncomfortable conversation with your staff about their compensation. The last conversation you're not going to choose, though. You're going to be forced upon, and you don't want to be in this position. And that's being forced to have an uncomfortable conversation with your bank, with your partner, with your family, with anyone who's invested in your business, to say that you're shuttering it. And I think when you put it in that framework, these other conversations are a lot easier to have.
Yep. And let me throw another one in there too. Have an uncomfortable conversation with yourself, right? Like really talk to yourself and figure out, why are you feeling uncomfortable? What do you really, honestly, truly need to change here? And just, don't shy away from having it with yourself as well. It's good practice as well.
It's great.
Because that could be a lot scarier than having a conversation with your landlord, to really, truly talk to yourself. So
it might be at the root cause of a lot of this. Well, I love this. Well, guys, as we're wrapping up part 1, we're going to be coming back to you with part 2 of this, talking uncomfortable conversations when it comes to team, and part 3, uncomfortable conversations when it comes to clients. Can't wait to dive in deep to this. If you have been listening to this on Apple or Spotify on one of our podcast streaming services, guys, please hit subscribe, share this with as many studio owners as you can. If you've joined us on a video streaming service like YouTube, once again, hit subscribe, share this away. We cannot wait to hear how you're making some changes and what types of conversations you're willing to have.